Zanzibar on the 8th of January 2021. It was a day sail across to Pemba Island, where we arrived in the late afternoon just before sunset. The winds at this time of the year, they start at about 10 o'clock in the morning, blowing from the northeast, which are called the Kaskazi winds. So it is quite a challenge as the day gets on to get the right angle to get to Pemba Island. On the 9th of January, we sailed across to Misali Island, which is a nature reserve, and there's some turtle breeding program on the go there. So we went there for the day, and there's only one spot where you're allowed to anchor, where there's some buoys around. We also decided to do some investigation on the bottom of the boat because we had lost power on one of the engines. The port engine was giving us no power. So when we dived, we actually found that the propeller had been damaged by some rope. In the late afternoon, we made our way to Makumbu Peninsula for the evening, where we in fact had a huge storm with blowing over 35 knots, and the rain was horizontal. So we managed to drag about 500 meters before the boat actually got a hold, and then the rest of the evening was uneventful. You get to see quite a few canoes which have been converted to trimarans with a sail up. And when the wind is blowing strong, you see the sailors standing out on the outrigger holding on to the ropes that are holding up the mast. In the morning after the storm, we woke up to find Ypsilanti, a friend's boat, had also made its way through the little islands to anchor near us. And they had just arrived from Madagascar, so we basically spent 2 days relaxing at this island before we moved on. On the 12th of January, we sailed over to Fundu Island. The island is a local cemetery for all of the local islands, and there's not many people around on the island, so we had a nice quiet anchorage. And we found some lovely reefs where we could do some snorkeling. Pemba Island actually stands for Green Island because, as you can see from these drone pictures, the islands are all extremely green and lots of vegetation with small beaches and big rock overhangs going into the sea. The tide shift at spring tides can be 4 meters, so one has to be careful exactly where you anchor, and you have to scout out around the area we're going to angle to take this into consideration when you anchor. We had great protection at the island in terms of the sea, so it was very flat and very clean, so we could jump under the boat to have a closer look at the propeller. And what we found is that we could actually put a cable tie in one of the areas of the propeller to allow the blades of the propeller to stay at the correct pitch, so we could get a bite from the propeller until we could get the parts to actually fix the propeller. Every day at mid-tide we would take the dogs to the beach, which they absolutely loved. We had some amazing sunsets at this island. For me, it was the first to see so many anemones and clownfish at such a shallow depth and so close to the shore. On the dinghy, Leia always positioned herself to see our every move. When we were on the beach, Leia was completely fascinated by the the crabs and all of the little life that was around the beach and on the rocks, and spent all the time we were at the beach chasing the animals and chasing the little crabs, and then not knowing what to do with them.
It's a crabby. Leave a crabby. Come here, bitchy.
When we went on the dinghy to the shore, when we went snorkeling, the two dogs always followed us onto the dinghy. Jackie used to just stand, and Leia always insisted on watching us from the top of the dinghy. This particular day, I got the fright of my life when I was swimming, and I suddenly felt this bang on the side of my body, and I swerved around to look up and find her. She had fallen off the dinghy and was swimming in the water to come and get help, so we could get her out the water and put her back on the dinghy. Leia.
Looks like
The black dots are coming and going.
We woke up one morning to find a baby squid lying on the back of the boat. Obviously it had died, so we put it in a bucket of water, and then all these colors started coming back. Well, we were at Fundu Island. It was spring low tide, so the tide was very far out and the rocks were completely exposed, making it difficult to get the dinghy close to shore. On the 14th of January we sailed out into the open ocean and north to the northern section of Pemba Island called Fundu Gap, which is a deep, very narrow gap that you pass through back into the island again. It was a 30 nautical mile sail. Around the whole of Pemba Island the waters are blue, very clear, and there are lots of coral bommies that you have to watch out for when you're navigating around these waters.
Baby, look.
Once we were safely anchored, we hopped in the dinghy and started to explore all these ragged cliff edges and all the overhang of the rocks into the water, together with the abundance of greenery.
Look at that. Wow. There, behave. The private beach. Oh, you see that big boy running on the rocks. You know what I always think of when I see places like this, like all the bugs and insects and that in these bushes. Snakes, insects, bugs, wasps.
When we got back, the local kids had rowed out in a canoe to sell us some fruit.
What happened to the face? This boy.
The lemons disaligned.
There.
The next day, which was 15th of January, we raised the anchor and we sailed back to Fundu Gap, which was a 50 nautical mile trip. And what we realized when we got into this gap and we tried to put the anchor down on the corner is that with the spring tides, the currents were really strong, so we put out a lot of scope on the chain to get us to hold there, because we were going to be there for the night. On anchor at Fundu Gap, the Zanzibar Navy came to visit and just checked that all our documents were in order to be in the area, and were very pleasant, very nice people, and once they saw everything was fine, they were happy and off they went again. that hole in the wall over there? Once again in the morning we jumped on the dinghy and we went exploring all the way on both sides of this Fundu Gap. It's 35 meters down to the bottom in the center, but the sides come up quite shallow, and later we did some snorkeling here. And the other interesting thing is right on the corner of the gap to the open sea on the rocks is a resort, and it's got its dining room right on the rocks overlooking the whole bay area here. These rocky zones were absolutely full of crabs of all kinds, which Leia completely enjoyed tormenting.
Jumbo!
At about 11 o'clock on January the 16th, we left Pemba Island. We raised the anchor and we left through Fundu Gap, heading towards Tanga. We pulled up the spinnaker as it was a nice downhill run, and it was a 40 nautical mile sail to arrive at Tanga. We arrived at Tanga Yacht Club at about 3:30 in the afternoon and put down anchor and went across to go and find out what the formalities at the club were. There were about 10 other international boats sitting in Tanga Yacht Club. Most of them had been crossing the Indian Ocean, had all got stuck in the whole COVID situation, and were quite happy to be floating around Tanzania. The Tanga Yacht Club is very welcoming to foreign boats and is a very pleasant place to spend some time while you make your plans for your next destination. From Tanga we sailed on to Kenya, entering at Shimoini, and that will be in the next video. If you like this video, please click the like button and subscribe to see further episodes.